was our unabashedly flagrant attendance of the local public schools that made my sister and me the outcasts of our Sunday school class. While I did have some concerns about South Carolina's educational system, I saw no cause for such discrimination. Surely the square root of 4 is the same no matter where you do your calculations. As far back as I can remember, my family attended a conservative Baptist church every Sunday morning. As a family, we shared healthy beliefs about life and God, but some religions require you to pick and choose the rules you think are most practical. Well, Jesus drank wine, Mom still says, refilling her glass from the box of Shiraz she keeps on the counter behind a plastic fern. We had a ritual when church people came over to make our home look as though no one lived there. There could be no evidence that we sat on the couches or ate with the silverware. We would stash away glossy magazines, action-packed DVDs, and my tasteful oil paintings of Fabio and other Harlequin-worthy celebrities that I would debut to my dad by hanging on the wall over his pillow. Mom in particular was very concerned about being portrayed as a living, breathing human being, as if church people are anything else. My dad and I agreed that church people spend too much time pretending not to be human, though he was the first to take my black and white portrait of Orlando Bloom off the dining room mantel. Subsequently, my sister and I sat as rogue Christians among the other overly sheltered homeschool kids in our Sunday class. To them, we were wild, loose women at ages 11 and 13, living in a shameful world of lockers and carpools. Really, we should have been seen as humanitarians, infiltrating the lines of church and state to spread word of life in the real world. But they were homeschooled, so I couldn't expect them to draw the parallel. Their lives revolved around home and religion, and while they were always polite, they held their guards up, as though they'd been told to be wary of us dealing drugs through the tulle and lace of our Sunday dresses. At home, Ellen and I complained vehemently about all of it, but our parents maintained that we should feign interest and be kind. They had attended this church for years, long before the children's group divided into rival street gangs. As the lone slipshod couple that didn't homeschool their children, they were on thin ice with the other parents, so they signed us up for numerous activities to make themselves seem like concerned citizens. Mom had a real fear of the other mothers noticing her disinterest in their assorted efforts of organized fun. My mother's always been wonderfully uninvolved with cutesy mom things, but she's also quite worried about coming off as an independent thinker, as though she finds that notion rude. Ellen was finally exonerated from all church activities and duties when she went away to college, leaving me as the lone vigilante that went to a high school and drove a car and had friends of the opposite sex. By then, I was certain the church people's distrust of mass education was completely unnecessary, as I wasn't really learning much of anything over there anyways. Genghis Khan, the French Revolution, someone made a big bomb. This didn't seem to have anything to do with real life. I wondered what the church kids were learning. If they came out of this knowing how to change a tire or open a business. When I was 17, a small, excitable woman took over the church youth group. My dad called her Minnie Mouse because she was squeaky and enthusiastic and loved feelings. Minnie had an odd liking for me that I could not explain. She appreciated my jokes, and I appreciated her for allowing humor to delight her. On the other hand, I could also sense that she was worried about me, that perhaps I was too involved in my life outside of the church. I was a happy teen that never slammed my door or picked fights with my folks, so I was concerned about Minnie's concern. Her constant efforts to save me with love and group involvement were not just lost on me, but were in fact commercial strength off-putting. Minnie was the type to hold your hand while she asked about your week and was easily reduced to tears for both kind and sad notions. She frightened me in every way. Just moments before my 18th birthday, Minnie decided it would be a good idea for all the girls in the class to have a weekend beach getaway, 1 hour south of the beach we all lived on, to an extremely similar, though more isolated beach. Girls' Weekend, she called it, and we would sing songs and play games and eat junk food. Naturally, I begged Mom not to make me go. I had no desire to spend my weekend with a bunch of giggling middle school girls who wouldn't follow my Seinfeld references. But, still afraid of Christianly judgment, Mom dumped me out in front of the church van on Friday afternoon. There were just a few of us girls from the Sunday school class, but they all brought friends with them, raising the number to 9 attendees. The girls all seemed to know each other from what I assumed were homeschool support groups or industries created to give the kids a reason to venture out of their houses. All the girls were 13 years old, creating a nearly 5-year age gap between me and the rest of my weekend comrades. They all paired off when we loaded into the van, leaving me in the passenger seat next to Minnie. I spent the drive making polite small talk, hoping to convince her that I wasn't a lost cause, just a bashful loner. Minnie gathered us in the rental house and tried to build excitement for the events of the weekend. She gave us welcome packets, little purple mirrors with princess written in cursive across the back, pink feathery pens, and ribbons with sparkles and beads. Also in our bags were letters from old ladies we didn't know, encouraging us to be strong women who walk through life with confidence. This struck me as an unsettling gesture. Not only did I not know a single one of the 12 old bats who addressed me by name in the letters, but what was this about? Did they know something I didn't? We played a cringeworthy icebreaker game that made my face sweat. Because I was older, I instantly became the cool one, and it put me in an odd position. My life did not revolve around my religion like the rest of the girls, and I was hesitant to reveal to them that something as personal as your faith is often of little consequence to everyone else in the world. That believing in anything too strongly kind of freaks people out. Take the OxyClean guy, for example. Nevertheless, my sarcastic responses that avoided their questions made each of the excitable girls hook onto me like barnacles. Ready to get started, Minnie had us all sit in an arch on the floor by her feet. I was reluctantly at the crest of the arch, my army of giggling fans flanking both sides. What a dismal moment. It would be days before I walked out of this place. The anticipation of Minnie announcing her intentions for the weekend was both boring and terrifying. Suddenly, overwhelmed with happiness, Minnie choked out the news. Not only were we here to have fun and strengthen our relationships with each other and our sisterhood, this weekend we'd be learning all about abstinence. First things first, she said joyfully, our theme song. Reading instructions from an index card that had been taped to the wall, she hit play on the home stereo system, and we learned the lyrics to a song about the strategic avoidance of sex. No more dating, I'm just waiting. And the girls sang this anthem with pride. We sang this song each morning of the weekend before we started the day's lesson. Up until then, the only sex talk I'd received was in the 7th grade. I don't recall much of it beyond the very sterile use of the word insert. Oh, and sex is for married couples. My friend Amanda had already started having sex back in the 6th grade. I was stunned about it, but I never let her know. Mostly I wondered why she would want to partake in what seemed like an exceptionally invasive process. I still didn't know how it all worked, but it sure seemed gross, and with parents and teachers being so uncomfortable talking about it, well, it really must be something. No thanks. And no thanks on having a baby either. Why the adults thought I'd find sex interesting was beyond me. If it's for married people, why are you telling us about it? Guess I'll file that away with Genghis Khan in case it ever becomes useful. Years passed without much more thought put into it. I was embarrassed that adults assumed my hormones were running wild. They'd make winky-eyed statements about cute boys or weekend parties, and I'd gaze back at them, wondering what it must have been like for them to be so riled up all the time, embarrassed that they thought me so primitive. In reality, I'm lucky I was not sexually inclined at that age. For once you are properly educated on a subject, you become very aware of how terribly wrong things could have gone if you had attempted the stunt with the paltry knowledge you'd been given. Oh, the snakes that could have bit you. Other kids weren't so lucky as I was to be a late bloomer. There was a whole class for the pregnant girls at our school, and it seems it all could have been avoided if someone would just tell us how it all worked. Frankly, I blame the adults. On the first night of Girls' Weekend, we were taught not to compare ourselves to Barbie. I wondered if Barbie was still a role model at 13. I had turned on Barbie somewhere in elementary school because I felt she was too high maintenance and looked better in clothes than I did. I also knew Barbie and I resided in different categories of life. She was a lean young blonde with a feminine figure. I was a swarthy 8-year-old with an 80-20 leg-to-torso ratio. Barbie and I just had nothing in common. At 17, I preferred the slightly more realistic dream of tweezing away my excess body hair to uncover my hidden Penelope Cruz, a true femme fatale. Though I also wanted nothing to do with being seductive. It was a confusing time. In this part of the country, learning about sex was lost with the art of churning butter in any of the more liberal-minded pilgrims. It took me a long time to figure out what sex was. While I had a vague understanding of the basics, when I asked my mom about it, she told me she'd tell me later, and then she ran away. I pieced it together slowly through an assortment of highly diverse and potentially unreliable sources, as well as guest speakers at school who always caused a voluntary gender segregation at recess that day. One such speaker alluded to the fact that guys can slurp their penis back up into their body when they aren't using it. I was much too old when I found out the penis is not retractable. The following few days of the getaway focused on female bonds, the females to bond with, in this case being the group of pimply tweens I just met. Minnie made us sit in a circle and hold sweaty hands and give each other compliments. It wasn't long before someone started crying and knocked over that first domino that resulted in a room full of hiccupy weepers. An awkward panic washed over me. I didn't see what there was to cry about. Would they notice I wasn't crying? Would that matter? No wonder men think girls cry all the time. Y'all are setting the movement back at least 10 years. Get a hold of yourself. I decided I should try to squeeze out at least one tear to avoid being singled out. But I couldn't. I guess I just didn't get it. When it was my turn to receive compliments, I took the kind words like lashings and subtly turned away from the leaky, sniffling faces pointed in my direction. I had to let go of my neighbor's wet hands to wipe my own on my jeans. And then from nowhere, two snot-encrusted arms that belonged to a girl I'd only met the day before wrapped around me from behind, and her shaky voice proclaimed, "I love you." Something about this traumatic morning made the girls feel they had jumped a valence of sorts, so they would spontaneously hug and say "I love you" to each other. All weekend this happened to me, and I could only thank them and carry on with my tasks. Eventually, Minnie gave us a talk on the birds and the bees, except it wasn't at all. It was a demand for us to wait until marriage to ever be physical with another person. She told us sex would ruin our lives, that it would be painful, and we'd only ever feel shame again. It's just something you have to do for your husband. While I had no real interest in the matter, it occurred to me that this was a damaging thing to tell a girl. Surely sex can't be that awful, seeing as the world has an overpopulation problem. Minnie never told us that sex has an acceptable place in life, nor did she explain that it's a good thing that's sometimes just used harmfully, kind of like magnets. She told us we were teacups that chipped and shattered with every physical touch. "Don't you want to present your husband with a perfect teacup?" she asked with sincerity. I rolled this around in my mind. I hugged my dad. Does he count? What about my first kiss? Is that bad? How's my teacup? I wondered if Minnie thought men were interested in fine china. On the topic of marriage, we were shown a list of qualities your husband must possess. I was caught red-handed, merely listening to the list being read, and Minnie asked why I wouldn't write down such valuable information. Her suggestion of an intuitive man with compassionate listening skills seemed like a rarity, so I simply stated that I knew this already. I read the worry on her face, but was beginning to feel less concerned about her concern, because I was mad, still festering about the princess mirrors. I was angry because the other girls were soaking in every word. Each of the events of the weekend were disconcerting to me, whereas the other girls seemed to find it all fun and informative. They were going to be naive and afraid of intimacy. They would never be able to accept that sex is something they're allowed to enjoy, that the number of kids they might have didn't have to be dictated from elsewhere. Did Minnie want us to be strong, independent women, or submissive, insecure girls? Did she want Barbie or Penelope Cruz? The abstinence-only approach to family planning is like teaching your child to avoid the stove and then sending them off to college without knowing how to put out a grease fire. "Don't go near the stove," we tell them. "It could burn you." At some point, though, they're going to use the stove, whether you like it or not, and because you never taught them anything but fear, there are a myriad of possible disasters available to them. The list goes as follows. The aforementioned grease fire, fires of other origins, burning their skin, burning their food, undercooking their food, and subsequent poisoning. So far, most of these result in the need for hospital staff or firefighters. Less dramatic, but equally annoying, ruining cookware, wasting food, and also burning down the whole building. Even studies from conservative organizations show that abstinence-only education results in a higher rate of teen pregnancy in those areas. Whether the desire for abstinence is culturally or religiously driven, the effect it has on women in particular is a hindrance for the entire community. It intentionally avoids medically accurate information, reinforces harmful stereotypes, and shames victims of sexual assault, while usually dismissing the assailant. The U.S. spends multiple billions of dollars each year on teen pregnancies, social services for unwanted children, abortions, and the treatment of sexually transmitted ickiness in place of simply investing in a comprehensive sex education. This would cost only $5 million annually. Think of the savings alone. Perhaps if we gave people all of the information, there would be less abortion cases for strangers to feel affected by. It's almost like education leads to positive outcomes for everyone. On our last night together, we watched a Lifetime movie about a man who marries a pregnant woman so that she won't be shunned from the community. His name was Ray, and he never once touched the disbelieving pregnant woman who eventually came around to cooking and cleaning for him. Ray was patient and kind, and didn't even stand uncomfortably close to the girl, a real red-blooded man type. Throughout the duration of the movie, the girls would squeal and swoon. "I want a Ray," they all exclaimed at some point or another. I told the girls they were a bunch of saps, and that men like Ray are too squeamish to tell you that they like you, so you never actually wind up with a guy like Ray. Minnie caught the tail end of my rant. She laughed nervously and then scampered into the kitchen. When the movie ended, the VCR turned off, a TV show clicked on to reveal a shirtless man reading a book in bed by himself, and everyone screamed and shielded their eyes, including Minnie. I found myself wondering if Minnie thought the penis was retractable. In many other parts of the world, young girls can't be impregnated soon enough. The moment they're able to conceive, girls are traded to old men to use for breeding. These men feel the world needs more people of their caliber. Unlike the narrative many comparatively lucky American girls are told, the individual future of these child brides are of little consequence. She need not be educated or given economic opportunity. She simply exists for a man's use. The pendulum swing on what girls are taught and allowed is drastic, contradictory, and oppressive. Is there any part of the world that sees girls as autonomous beings with rights to knowledge and choices? If we give them reproductive choice, they might not do what we want, the men must grumble, shaking in their loafers. The current crisis of the falling U.S. population is predominantly critical for large entities concerned with sales, but this is a whole other complex bag of worms. What's shocking is the interconnectedness of the global economy and women's reproductive autonomy. Or perhaps to some that part is logical. Maybe what's shocking is the length taken by so many organizations to control this information. The speed with which I was packed and settled in the church van on departure day was legendary. There were no words left to say between Minnie and me. The knowledge of our resistance to each other floated up there in the front seat with us the whole drive home. I wondered what she thought about me and the weekend and the other girls in the van. Was she pleased with herself overall? Did she feel that went well? My mind drifted to my friend Amanda and the other girls at school with boyfriends who didn't all seem traumatized from time spent with someone they enjoyed being around. In fact, they looked forward to it. I wondered whose job it should be to teach young people about sex. Parents seemed to avoid it. Schools took a tactical, science-based strategy. Church swung drastically towards the fires of hell. In any case, how do we account for the understandably colored experience of a teacher? I wouldn't want to learn about sex from a nun, but Dr. Ruth might be a bit much. Maybe the right to this particular information is a job for a fourth party, some sort of blend of a medical doctor and a life coach. I cut my eyes over at the tiny little hands on the steering wheel. Poor Minnie. I wondered who must have taught her about sex. But mostly I kept giggling to myself, tickled by the riotous notion that I'd be a lumpy teacup prize for some lucky man someday.